And what that means, and you're not going to hear this from anybody else, what that means is that the powers that be, corporate America, Wall Street, the huge campaign contributors, the corporate media, these folks are so powerful that no president can do what has to be done for working families unless millions of people join the political revolution. Now, it is true that the people on top have unbelievable sums of money. That's true, and they have incredible power. But there is one thing that we have that they don't have, and that is we have the people. And when people come together, there is nothing that we cannot accomplish. Now, today, you may not appreciate this, but today in America, we live in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. But most Americans don't know that, don't feel that, because almost all of the wealth and all of the income is going to the top 1%. In America today, we have more wealth and income inequality than almost any major country on earth. And it is worse today than at any time since 1928. Now, I want you to hear this and think if this is the kind of country you want to be living in. In America today, listen to this, the top 0.1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. In America today, one family, the Walton family of Walmart, owns more wealth than the bottom 40% of the American people. When you talk about an economy that is rigged, understand that in the last 2 years, the 15 wealthiest people in this country, 15 people, saw their wealth increase by $170 billion, which is more money than is owned by the bottom 130 million Americans. Now, I can tell you that in my state of Vermont, you got many, many people who are working not one job, they're working 2 jobs, they're working 3 jobs, and I am sure that is the case here in Georgia and the case all over America. In fact, turns out that while the Japanese are very, very hard workers, we in the United States work longer hours than the Japanese and longer hours than any other people in the industrialized world. We work incredibly long hours, and I go around the country and I talk to working people, and they're working 50, 60 hours a week. Husbands and wives don't see each other. Marriages are destroyed. People are not spending time with their kids because they're out working and working and working, trying to cobble together some income and health care. And yet, despite the fact that we work so hard, it turns out that 58% of all new income generated in America today goes to the top 1%. Brothers and sisters, our job is to create an economy that works for all of us and not just a handful of billionaires. And this campaign is sending a message to the billionaire class. And that message is, you cannot have it all. You are not going to get huge tax breaks when children in Georgia and Vermont go hungry. Ain't gonna happen. You are not going to continue shipping our jobs to China when workers in this country desperately need decent paying work. You are not going to cut the wages and the benefits and the pensions of workers and then give the CEOs of large corporations outrageous compensation packages. And when we talk about the economy, it is not just that we have a grotesque and immoral level of income and wealth inequality. It is also that unemployment in this country is much higher than most people assume. Every month, federal government comes out with a report. It's called official unemployment. Nationally, that means they say it's about 5%. But what that report does not include are people who have given up looking for work and people who are working part-time when they want to work full-time. And when you add all of that together, real unemployment is close to 10%. And now let me tell you something which we almost never discuss, and that is the tragedy of youth unemployment in America. Now, a couple of months ago, I asked some economist in Washington to do a study for me, and I said, please tell me what the rate of real unemployment is for kids 17 to 20 who are high school graduates, not dropouts, high school graduates. And this is what they reported. For white kids, the number is 33%. For Hispanic kids, 36%. For African American kids, 51%. Now, I want you to think for a moment what that means and what the implications of that. All right, we have to take a break. I'm sorry. I didn't realize my oratory was so powerful. I don't know. But the gentleman, as you know, just walked off the stage, and I think he's feeling better.
To continue hearing racist words coming from major political leaders. Now, I don't believe in some foreign ism, but I do believe in American idealism. And one of the pleasures, one of the real joys that I've experienced on this campaign so far, being here today with you, being all over the country, is seeing the huge numbers of young people who are coming out, who want to make this country better, who want to use their intelligence and their energy to address the many problems that we have. So I want to thank all of the young people here and all over this country for their idealism, and do not become cynical. I am not running for president because it is my turn. Not quite. I was born in a 3.5-room apartment in a working class family in Brooklyn, New York. I don't think. Okay. So I got Brooklyn, I got Vermont. And by the way, I visited California. But in seriousness, it is not quite my turn. That's not why I'm running for president. But I am running for president in order for all of us to be able to live in a nation of hope and opportunity, not for some, but for my 7 grandchildren and for all of you. Nobody understood better than Franklin Delano Roosevelt the connection between American strength at home and our ability to defend America around the world. And that is why he proposed a second Bill of Rights in 1944. And he said in that very same State of the Union, and I quote again, "America's own rightful place in the world depends in large part upon how fully these and similar rights have been carried into practice for all our citizens. For unless there is security here at home, there cannot be lasting peace in the world," end quote. Now, I am not running for president to pursue reckless adventures abroad, but to rebuild America's strength at home. I will never hesitate to defend this nation, but I will never send our sons and daughters to war under false pretense or pretenses about dubious battles with no end in sight. And as we discuss foreign policy, I know that all of you share with me your shock and your horror at what happened in Paris, and you share with me your condolences for the families who lost loved ones and your hopes and prayers that those who were wounded will recover. And also those same thoughts go out to the families of those who lost loved ones in the Russian flight that we believe was taken down by an ISIS bomb, and also those who lost their lives to terrorist attacks in Lebanon and elsewhere. To my mind, it is clear that the United States must pursue policies to destroy the brutal and barbaric ISIS regime and to create conditions that prevent fanatical extremist ideologies from flourishing. But we cannot and should not do it alone. Our response must begin with an understanding of past mistakes and missteps in our previous approaches to foreign policy. It begins with the acknowledgement that unilateral military action should be a last resort, not a first resort. And that ill-conceived military decisions such as the invasion of Iraq can wreak far-reaching devastation and destabilization over regions for decades. It begins with the reflection that the failed policy decisions of the past, rushing to war, regime change in Iraq, or toppling Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran in 1953. Mossadegh was the president. CIA and others got rid of him to protect British petroleum interests. The Shah of Iran came in, a brutal dictator, and he was thrown out by the Islamic Revolution, and that is where we are in Iran today. Decisions have consequences, often unintended consequences. So whether it was Saddam Hussein or Mossadegh or Guatemalan President Arbenz in 1954 in Guatemala, Brazilian President Goulart in 1964, Chilean President Allende in 1973. This type of regime change, this type of overthrowing governments we may not like, often does not work, often makes a bad and difficult decision even worse. These are lessons we must learn. After World War II, in response to the fear of Soviet aggression, European nations and the United States established NATO, the North American Treaty Organization, an organization based on shared interest and goals and the notion of a collective defense against a common enemy. It is my belief that we must expand on these ideals and solidify our commitments to work together to combat the global threat of terror. We must create a new organization like NATO to confront the security threats of the 21st century, an organization that emphasizes cooperation and collaboration to defeat the rise of violent extremism and, importantly, to address the root causes underlying these brutal acts. We must work with our NATO partners. We must work to expand the coalition with Russia, and we must work with members of the Arab League. But let us be very clear. While the United States and other Western nations have the strength of our militaries and our political systems, the fight against ISIS is a struggle for the soul of Islam, and countering violent extremism and destroying ISIS must be done primarily by Muslim nations with the strong support of their global partners. Now, this has been my view long before Paris, but I am very happy to tell you that these same sentiments have been echoed by people like Jordan's King Abdullah II in a speech just Sunday, in which he said that terrorism is the greatest threat to our region, the Gulf region, Middle East, and that Muslims must lead the fight against it. He noted that confronting extremism is both a regional and international responsibility, and that it is incumbent on Muslim nations and communities to confront those who seek to hijack their societies and their religion with generations of intolerance and violent ideology. And let me congratulate King Abdullah not only for his wise remarks, but also for the role that his small country is playing in attempting to address the horrific refugee crisis in that region. A new and strong coalition coalition of Western powers, Muslim nations, and countries like Russia must come together in a strongly coordinated way to combat ISIS, to seal the borders that fighters are currently flowing across, to share counterterrorism intelligence, to cut off the spigot of terrorist financing, and to end support for exporting extremist ideologies. Now, what does that mean? What it means is that in many cases, we must ask more from those countries in the Gulf region. While Jordan, Turkey, Egypt, and Lebanon, in their own ways, have accepted their responsibilities for taking in Syrian refugees, other countries in the region have done nothing or very little. Equally important, and this is a point that may make some people uncomfortable, but it is a point that must be made. Countries in the region, like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE, countries of enormous wealth and resources, have contributed far too little in the fight against ISIS. That must change. King Abdullah is absolutely right when he says that the Muslim nations must lead the fight against ISIS, and that includes and must include some of the most wealthy and powerful nations in the region who, up to this point, have done far too little.
Thank you. Thank you, Atlanta. You know, we've done a lot of events throughout the South, but we've never had a turnout like this. Thank you very much. And let me thank Killer Mike. That was quite an introduction. Now, Killer Mike is, as you all know, a great rapper, but he is a lot more than that. He's trying to talk truth throughout this country and, in fact, throughout the world, trying to bring people together. Mike, thanks very much for what you're doing. This afternoon, here in Atlanta, I was able to visit the very beautiful Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change. And I had the opportunity to meet with Dr. King's daughter, Dr. Bernice King. And to me, that was a very moving visit because Dr. King is one of my heroes and clearly one of the great leaders in the modern history of the United States of America. He was a great leader because he was a man not only of great intelligence and great courage, he was a guy who was beaten time and time again, thrown in jail time and time again, but he kept his eyes on the prize. And that's a lesson. Victory does not come easily. Struggle does not come easily. And what we need to do is to keep our eyes on the prize as he did. Always fighting for what he called the beloved community, his vision for a world of justice, of peace, and equality for all humanity. That was his vision. And Dr. King was a great leader because he understood a profound truth. It was true in his lifetime, true before him, and true today, that real change always takes place from the bottom on up, never from the top down. And that's why he and his associates were extraordinary organizers, organizing millions of people throughout this country to stand up to racism, to stand up to segregation, and to create a more just society. And he was a great leader because he believed in democracy, and he believed in the importance of people being involved in the political process. And he spent an enormous amount of time and energy to tenaciously fight for the Voting Rights Act so that people in this country, all people, have the right to vote regardless of the color of their skin. And that's a lesson, and Killer Mike just made that point, that I want all of you and all Americans to appreciate. It's not only Dr. King. It's people in World War II in countries, fighting in countries throughout the world to defend American democracy. And when you turn your back on democracy, when you say, I'm just too busy to vote, or I don't really care, or I don't believe in the political process, you're turning your back not only on Dr. King, but on God knows how many men and women who fought and died to protect democracy in this country. And Dr. King was a great leader because he continued to grow and expand his vision. Now, you don't necessarily know this if you watch the TV, but the truth is, he did much more than just fight segregation and racism. What he did against enormous opposition from the establishment, opposition from people who contributed money to his organization, he said, you know, I, Dr. King, have been a proponent of nonviolence my entire life. And I see America engaged in a war in Vietnam that they should not be engaged in, and I must speak out against that war. He didn't have to do that, but he did. Furthermore, he was a great leader because he understood that justice in America was even more than civil rights. It was economic rights as well. And what he said was that, of course, we have to end segregation at lunch counters and at hotels and at universities and schools. But then he also said, what difference does it make if a family can't afford to send their kid to those schools or eat in that restaurant? And I hope all of you will remember where he was and what he was doing when he was assassinated in 1968. He was standing shoulder to shoulder with sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee, union workers, who were being exploited, workers who were earning wages much too low, workers who were having work conditions.
World on edge amid global terror threats. One Muslim French man's message is going viral, saying, quote, "I am addressing all Muslims of France. Let's protect our beautiful religion. Let's go and track down these imposters who pretend to be Muslims and kill people. It's not the authorities who are going to get rid of them. It is us." Man, that is welcome news. Our next guest, a former radical jihadist himself, says the message represents how most Muslims feel. Mubin Sheikh is also author of Undercover Jihad, and he joins us right now. He looks at the Toronto 18. Mubin, first off, your reaction to that video and why it's getting so many plays right now.
Well, I think it's rightfully so. It's getting a lot of plays because he's saying what a lot of French Muslims are feeling, what a lot of non-French Muslims are feeling, that this is a problem that Muslims will ferret out from within our ranks.
Well, why is it taking so long? Why does it take an attack like this to realize there's a dangerous sect within your ranks?
Well, I think the problem is you have 6 million Muslims in France. You know, if a tenth of 1% were like ISIS, that'd be 6,000 fighters. It's very difficult to detect people who are closed, especially family relations. Generally speaking, families, when they're radicalized, it's very hard to infiltrate those groups.
You know, we look at some of these groups. For example, the woman that blew herself up 2 months before, she's a party girl. The guy that we're chasing right now is somebody who's known to do bong hits and go around drinking. We know that hijackers are in here going to strip clubs. So there's nothing pure about what they're doing.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I mean, for all the, you know, we're religious, what they do is they put on a costume of religion, and a lot of times it's to kind of clear up and cover up the behaviors that they're really doing behind the scenes.
What I think from an outsider, as a Catholic on the outside, I think it's almost an insult to Muslims to keep defining over and over again, it's not a war against all Muslims. We know, don't you know that already? That the West does not have a problem with all Muslims? It's the jihadists who are blowing us up, not Muslims in general?
That's a great message. That's a great message, Brian. I think it needs to be reinforced more because at the end of the day, this is a common enemy, an enemy that attacks Muslims just as it does non-Muslims, and we need to understand that.
So what's the best way to take down ISIS? It's the belief among military minds. You got to wipe them out of Raqqa and stop them from working out of their bases where they feel secure and able to get trade going and a judicial system taking root. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, the military option is really going to be the only way. It will have to be a ground operation. A lot of these guys, they hide among civilians. I mean, air campaigns and bombings from the skies is not going to do much other than, you know, accelerate the civilian body count, and we don't want to do that. That plays into their narrative as well. It's going to come down to Muslim nations, Muslim armies to go and effectively do house-to-house searches in ISIS-held cities.
All right, and your message to jihadists like you were right now is what?
You're not Muslim. You're not Muslim. You're out.
Thank you so much. Mubin Sheikh, we need to hear from you over and over again. Thanks so much.
Absolutely horrendous. And he said, "I will stand with you." Because he understood that to be free in America meant that you have to have economic rights. You have to earn a living wage. And I hope you'll all remember that in the last months of his life, he was prepared to take on the entire establishment and take a hard look at the national priorities of America. And he was organizing, not a lot of people know this or remember this, but he was organizing what he called a Poor People's March. It was a march of African Americans, of whites, of Latinos, of Native Americans, and it was the coming together of all exploited people to demand that the United States government started passing policies which represented all of the people, not just the people on top. And in fact, in the last months of his life, he talked about a nation which had socialism for the rich and rugged individualism for the poor. Atlanta is the city in which Martin Luther King Jr. and his wife, Coretta Scott King, have their final resting place. And I hope that all of you in Atlanta will do everything that you can to keep the extraordinary vision of Dr. King alive. And what I want to do, and what we've been doing throughout this campaign, and the reason why I think our campaign has had as much success as it has had, is that we are simply treating the American people with intelligence. And what that means is that in a democratic society, politics is more than a 30-second ad. Politics is the need to lay out on the table the problems facing our country and in a respectful, intelligent way, figure out how we go from here to there. And politics is also an understanding, as Dr. King understood, that nothing real changes, that we don't make the change that we have to unless millions of people get involved in the political process, what I call a political revolution. And when all across this country, working people and low-income people and people of color and people who are gay and people who were born in other countries, when we understand that we're not going to allow them to divide us up, we're not going to allow them to scapegoat one group or another. When we come together and when we say loudly and clearly, enough is enough, that this great country and our government belong to all of us, not just a handful of billionaires. And that is what this campaign is about. It's a coming together. It's a telling people who have given up on the political process, you better come back in. And when we talk about politics in America, let me tell you what no other candidate for president will tell you, and that is that no president, not Bernie Sanders or anybody else, can do it alone.